and welcome to our March webinar. Today, Oliver Gunasekara, our CEO, is going to talk about mining for the climate crisis without destroying the planet. Off to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Holly, and welcome everybody. I'm excited to go on this topic. This is kind of an update of the South by Southwest talk that I gave just over a week ago in Austin, Texas, as part of that conference. I have a little bit more time now, so I've added a bit more information. So what I suggest is people hold questions until the end. I'll try and get through the material in about 30 minutes, and then we can have up to 30 minutes Q&A. Suggestion would be to use the raise hand icon, which is at the bottom. You can also put things in the chat. Okay, so mining for the climate crisis without destroying the planet. So what I want to really talk about is, first of all, why do we need these metals? And then what can we do to maybe reduce the need? And then how are we going to actually get the metal? So let's start. So the first thing is that this energy transition that I think everyone is committed to is really a metals transition. We're really moving away from fossil fuels to primarily electrification. And electrification needs metal. And if you look at data from the IEA and others, they're talking about something like 500% more metal is going to be needed in the form of nickel and cobalt and copper and others. This is just a huge increase. And you see analysts like Benchmark Mineral Intelligence talking about that just like over a decade from now, we're going to need something like 384 new mines just to keep up with electric vehicle demand alone. That's a huge number. And there are real challenges because it just takes an awful long time to get a new mine producing. So we have a big challenge ahead. Well, could we reduce demand? This is one option that some people are saying. The challenge here is that it has quite big negative connotations. If you look at developed economies like Europe and North America, it would significantly impact our GDP and our economy, and it's just not very practical. You know, in North America, we don't have a very big public transport infrastructure. And so to say that you could only have one car per family just is not practical. We just don't have the infrastructure. It's just not going to happen. And then if you look at the developing world, they're getting to the point where in some countries in Africa and India, they can start to afford some of the luxuries that we have had, like air conditioning and in the future EVs. Is it fair to say to them that, no, you can't have these luxuries because of the demands they put on the critical minerals? I don't think so. So I think where possible, we should try to reduce demand, but in a bigger macro scale, I don't think there's really much we can do, especially as more people are coming out of poverty and can now afford a lot of these luxuries. So I'm not a big believer that we're going to be able to drastically reduce demand. What about substitutions? Well, it is possible to use different chemistries in batteries. It's possible to use different metals in different applications, but there are always compromises. If you switch to a chemistry on the cathode that's called LFP, it's an iron phosphorus battery. It has some advantages. It doesn't need nickel and cobalt, but you fundamentally lose about a third of the energy density because these batteries are significantly heavier. That energy density and weight results in about a third less range. So if your nickel-rich chemistry, which is what the majority use today, could go, say, 300 miles, you're now down to 200 miles. And it still requires a lot of mining for iron and phosphorus and lithium. And so in our view, LFP is good for the ultra low cost, low range. It is also not particularly good at fast charging. And, it is popular in China, but in our view, it will not be the mainstream chemistry for North America. North American consumers really are concerned about range anxiety. They're concerned about fast charging. They're concerned about cost, of course. But I think there are other things that can be done to lower the cost of the nickel and the cobalt that we'll come into. And, another thing is that, the LFP chemistry is fundamentally a Chinese technology. It was invented in the US, but it has been commercialized very heavily. And so the vast majority of the companies that are producing LFP are Chinese today. And so that makes it very difficult for them to qualify for the IRA subsidies, which again will mean that they potentially can be more expensive. They also can't be recycled. Now, I've done a webinar on this. If you're interested, there's a blog post and there is an archived webinar that goes into more detail on the comparisons of these two types of chemistries. But I want to kind of show some recent data from Fast Markets that's really showing the cost of these two types of chemistries. If you look in the United States, they're talking that without subsidies, it's maybe $136 a kilowatt hour compared to $132. That's pretty close. But the key here is that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies, drastically reduce that cost. And my premise is that because of the foreign entities of concern, which is China, you're not going to get those subsidies. So you're actually going to compare a $91 per kilowatt hour nickel-rich chemistry, NCM, against an LFP, which is going to be 132. And of course, there's no very little recycle value as well in the iron phosphorus. So enough on that subject. I'm not a believer that LFP is going to completely replace the market, although it will have its place in the lower, smaller packs, lower cost, smaller packs. So if we can't substitute and we can't reduce demand, we are left with having to do primary extraction. We have to get these metals from somewhere. And as we see it, there are basically four choices. We could go to space, we could recycle, we could do traditional mining, or we could go to the seabed. And so let's talk about each one. Now, if we talk about space mining, this has potential. But fundamentally, there is no legal framework, no internationally agreed rights of who owns these minerals, how are they distributed, how is it regulated. All of this is something that the seabed had 50 years ago, did not have, and has now been resolved. Also, even with people like SpaceX and their Starship rocket, they're getting the cost down, but it's still very, very expensive to get a rocket into orbit. And the footprint, the carbon footprint, the amount of energy that you need is still very, very large. And so I think it will start to become viable for specialized metals, maybe the platinum group of metals, but for the battery metals of nickel and cobalt and copper, I don't believe it's viable for the next few decades. And it will take time for an international treaty to come together. So what about recycling? Now, recycling is a great option. I'm all for the circular economy. And one of the big advantages of these metals is that they are infinitely recyclable. These are elements, unlike fossil fuels, which, once they're consumed, they cannot be repurposed. They have just emitted a lot of carbon and heat. But in the case of metals, these metals are not destroyed when they're used in a battery. They are consumed and they need to be repurposed and recycled, but they can be done. But what is the challenge with recycling? Well, it's timing. It takes a while. So if you think about a new electric vehicle that you buy today, the average car in America has an 11-year life. So you've got at least 10 plus years of life in that car, maybe longer. And then there is potential for a second life, because although the battery may have degraded by 20%, it's still perfectly good for, say, a stationary storage application, or maybe helping move solar power from the peak in the day when it's produced to allowing it to be used at night or in the evening when there is no solar. So it's likely these cells are going to have a second life, and that could extend another 10 years. So it's going to be 10 to 20 years before the battery that you purchase today as part of an electric vehicle is actually available for recycling. And so that means that, unfortunately, for the next 30 odd years, we still need massive amounts of primary metal. Recycling in around 30 years from now will start to be meaningful. It's still not going to completely displace mining, but for the next 10 to 30 years, we're still going to need a lot of primary mining. And almost all the recycling companies today are focused on battery scrap. That's the scrap material that comes out of the factory when you make the battery. And that's good. It's good that that's being recycled, but it's somewhat artificially higher than normal, because as you build a new factory, your scrap levels are much higher at the start. As you improve, those go down. So I'm a big believer in recycling and circular economy, but it's not going to move the needle in the next 20 to 30 years. So what about traditional land mining? This is kind of what we do today. We go to places on the earth and we either tunnel or build open pits. But we've been doing this for millennia. It's one of the oldest industries around. And so it turns out it's getting increasingly more expensive. And the reason why it's getting more expensive is the grade of the resource that we get out of the ground is going down. And it's going down because all the good high-grade material has already been mined. So if we were to look back 200 years ago, when we started doing some mining with nickel and copper, which had been mined for a long time, we could find grades at 20%. So you dug the ore out of the ground, and 80% was waste, 20% was the nickel or the cobalt. That was great. These days, for new mines, you're looking at a fraction of a percent. There are some mines in Canada that are attempting to get permitted and getting into production in the next few years at around 0.2% nickel grade, meaning 99.8% of what you dig out the ground is waste. That really hurts your economics. It makes it a challenge to manage all of that waste. Secondly, location. Location matters, because if this mine is local, you don't need to build a lot of infrastructure. But again, all the local locations have already been mined. And so what we're left with is new mines that are in very, very remote locations, a long way north in Canada, in the middle of Australia, etc. These mines don't have any infrastructure. And so to ultimately get the mine into production, you need to build a highway, potentially a train line, a village to host all of the workers, and a power plant or a connection to the grid so that you can supply power. All of that adds cost that the end producer has to pay for. And it also delays because you need permits and environmental review for all of the infrastructure, in addition to the actual mine itself, again increasing the costs. And this infrastructure is really, really expensive. It also takes a long time. It averages now 17 years from discovering a mineral deposit to getting all of the infrastructure built, getting all of the permits approved, and to getting into production. That's a long time. We can't wait that long. We need huge amounts of these metals if we're going to electrify everything, especially electric vehicles. The demand forecast is very, very large. Globally, we're about 20% of all new cars sold have a battery, are electric. And places like China are already at 40%. US is closer to 10, but this market is moving quite rapidly. And so we really can't wait the 17 years. And then there is huge pushback. Whenever there is the proposed mine or infrastructure for the mine, whether it's a processing plant or a highway or a train line, you get a lot of environmental and people pushing back. Not in my backyard. Everyone wants to drive an electric vehicle. Nobody wants a mine or a processing plant in their backyard. And so that's a big pushback. And partly why it takes so long is that you tend to see a lot of lawsuits, a lot of people challenging the building of this infrastructure, building of the mine. And once it goes to courts, there's due process, and it ends up taking years. Finally, we have a national security challenge, and that is that China has been very strategic. It has invested large amounts of capital in Africa and Indonesia, and now controls something like 70% of these critical minerals. So these mines are not in China, they're in Africa and Indonesia, but it's Chinese money, Chinese people, Chinese control. And that means that the environmental standards, the social standards, the corruption, bribery are all very different to what we're used to. But also it means that if there are geopolitical tensions, it will be possible for China to just turn this supply on and off. And that's very, very worrying as we try to transition our economy to be a low carbon electric economy. We do not want any one country to have that much control. And so, there's a huge challenge of, can we get enough of this material in time? But there's another issue around land mining, and that's the environmental, social, and governance side of things. Unfortunately, most of these mines are in very large, biodiverse, large biomass. The picture here is a real mine in Indonesia. It was a rainforest, but the nickel laterite ore is directly below the rainforest. So to get at it, you literally destroy the rainforest, all of the biomass, all of the biodiversity gone. You typically use diesel trucks to do that. And then you process it using a technology called HPAL, high pressure acid leaching. Typically the energy for that comes from coal, and you use lots of acid. And that acid is not destroyed. It ends up being dry stacked. And this is a seismic active area where if there is an earthquake, this can then leak into waters, pollute, and cause lots of issues. And you hear stories and you can read about how all the fish are dying, all the water is polluted. You also have issues of child labor and people being displaced. This is more in Africa, but where soldiers turn up and say, your village is now a mine, you have an hour to leave. This is just really unacceptable, I believe, in the 21st century. And there is a really good book that I encourage everybody to read. It's kind of shocking how the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, how about a third of their mining for cobalt is actually done with people. It's so-called artisanal mining. And of that, very often you have teenagers that are used in the mines. And unfortunately, there are injuries, there are deaths. They estimate in this book that maybe a child dies every single day. And these people are paid just $1 to $2 a day to mine. And often they can't afford to go to school. They have to work in these mines. This is something that I really think we need to find a way to stop. And there are some ideas coming up in the next few slides. So, talked about the challenges of the 3 other alternatives, including land mining. What about going to the deep sea? And there are some things here that I think are quite encouraging. First of all, we have a legal framework that was created in 1982. It's called the Law of the Sea, or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It's been updated. There's a 1994 implementation agreement. And so that sets out the legal framework for the fact that these resources in international waters are owned by everybody. and it establishes an international regulator called the International Seabed Authority, headquartered in Jamaica, to have exclusive jurisdiction to write the laws, to come up with the regulations, and to ultimately permit and tax this activity. Again, this is the first time in my knowledge that a non-government agency is effectively taxing. And I think it's great that this resource is for the benefits of all humanity. It's not for the benefits of just one country. And there are different resources in the seabed. We at Impossible Metals are exclusively focused on the polymetallic nodule. So for those that have video, I'm holding one of these nodules in my hand. They're potato-sized. They just lie on the seabed floor in massive quantities. And so that means there's no blasting or cutting. It's a 2D resource. We don't have to do any tunneling. And we get 4 metals in the one resource. And these grades are really, really high. So we get nickel, we get cobalt, we get copper, we get manganese. And all of this is packaged in this one rock that we don't have to blast or cut. Also, because it's in the ocean, we don't need to build new infrastructure. Unlike a mine that's in the north of Canada, we don't need a highway, a train line, a village, a power plant. We just reuse ships and ports. That drastically lowers our cost. And combined with the grade is one of the reasons why this will be the lowest cost to extract these metals. And again, I've done a blog post on that if you're interested. Also, we know for a fact nobody lives in the deep ocean. This can be up to 4 miles deep in the middle of the ocean. There is no one there. And collection systems will be highly integrated. So the risk of people being injured or killed is extremely low because this is an automated system. We do know from the scientific data that it's a low biomass. As I said, it can be up to 4 miles deep. No sunlight reaches that. There are no plants. There is megafauna. There are things like corals and sponges, and there are some species of octopus that lay their eggs. They're pretty uncommon, but they do exist. But most of the biomass, if you were to measure it by weight, would be something like 70% would be bacteria. And so you can imagine that bacteria does not weigh very much. So that shows how little other forms of biomass is there. But I want to be clear, this bacteria and this life is very, very unique. It is quite different to what we find elsewhere. And in fact, you don't have to go very far, just a few miles away, and you will find different species, different forms of bacteria, different forms of life. And so for me, one of the most important things that we must do is preserve that biodiversity, not allow for it to be all destroyed. Because if you go a long way away, or even not very far away, a few miles, you'll end up with species that are completely different. So the risk of destroying very unique life form that is only found in one area in the form of the bacteria is high. And we also know that the majority of the bacteria is in the seabed itself. There is some on the nodules, but the majority is actually in the seabed. And so if we could find a way to extract this resource in a responsible way, I believe we could remove the need for new nickel and cobalt mines from 2030. And I think that would just be wonderful for the planet, avoiding the environmental and social issues. So a little bit more on the seabed. So it is a very, very large resource. It has been studied for many, many years. And we now have quite a good idea of the size of the resource. And if you look at nickel, it's significantly larger, maybe 3x larger than what we know about in Indonesia, Australia, Brazil, etc. And this is just what's been discovered. There's much more that we will discover in time. And the same with cobalt. Everyone talks about the DRC, the Congo, but there is orders of magnitude more material available in the seabed for cobalt, and the same for manganese. So it's quite staggering, a very, very large resource. And, you know, why is it so large? Well, if you look at the surface area of our planet, you know, 71% of that area is sea, is oceans. Our planet is a planet of oceans. And so it makes sense that there is so much material there because it is such a large part of our planet and we have not yet mined. And because we haven't mined, the size that's remaining is also very, very large. And with new technology, we can drastically lower the impact. I believe the permitting risk will be much lower. The costs are going to be lower. And today, it's not majority controlled by China. So I want to just do a quick comparison of the reason we created the company. So the technology you see here on the left, this is the conventional dredging technology that was invented in the 1970s. And it is a system that gets lowered to the seabed floor, and it literally has tracks and it vacuums up the seabed. So it removes up to the top 10 centimeters, maybe 5 or so inches. So all of the bacteria, all of the sediment, nodules, any megafauna will get sucked up this pipe to the support ship. Our approach is quite radically different. We said that in 50 years, we can do better. And so we're using autonomous underwater vehicles, robots, and these robots hover, they don't land. And they use their AI and cameras to look at each rock, each nodule one by one. And if we detect life, we don't remove it. So it's a selective harvesting technology. Here you can see a comparison. When we started the company, we took a blank sheet of paper and we looked at the problem from 3 areas: the actual collection on the seabed floor, which is shown here. We looked at the vertical transport. How do you move the material from the seabed to a transport ship? And then once you're on a ship, how do you get it to port? Now, with the dredging approach, this was tested in the 70s. It's what everyone else is doing. You literally are vacuuming up the seabed floor, destroying all of the life that's in front of the vehicle. And then you pump it to the support ship. And then every few days, you have to figure out how you transfer the material to a transport ship. Our approach, quite different. We use these autonomous robots that are battery powered, that descend with their own buoyancy engine. And then when they get to the seabed, they hover. So I'm going to play a short 60-odd second video of how this system works.
At Impossible Metals, we are developing autonomous underwater vehicles that are launched from a ship to the ocean floor, where there are vast fields of rocks, called nodules, that are rich in metals that are critical for low-carbon technologies, like batteries. Hovering over the ocean floor, artificial intelligence uses cameras and robotic arms to pick up each nodule individually, minimizing sediment disturbance and avoiding visible life, while leaving behind a percentage and pattern of nodules to preserve biodiversity and ecosystem services. The collected nodules are stored on board, and once the vehicle is full, it returns to the ship. The recovery crane is designed with motion compensation for fast docking, giving the vehicle a stationary target. Once on board the ship, nodules are offloaded and the battery is swapped before the vehicle's next trip to the seafloor. A key part of this system is that the fleet of underwater vehicles remains at sea. As one ship is filled with nodules, another arrives to continue the collection operation. Our highly scalable fleet is designed to reach the high production levels required to meet market demand.
So that was the animation. I want to give a bit of a sneak preview here. We've been testing our 2nd generation robot. We call it Eureka 2. You can see here it's actually on the ship. And we've been testing this off the east coast of Florida in this ocean area called the Blake Plateau. So the Blake Plateau is a nodule field within the US exclusive economic zone. And this was some testing that we were doing last month. We will be going back next month, and we hope to have some good results to announce after that is successful. Just to kind of get to wrap up here, in our view, mining should really be responsible. And we had a go at trying to define what we think is responsible mining. And so our view, both the mining and the processing, the refining, needs to meet all of these criteria. So safety and human rights, carbon neutral, increases the potential for recycling, eliminates toxic waste, it avoids widespread habitat destruction, avoids water scarcity, avoids loss of biodiversity, avoids displacing indigenous people and communities. And this is our North Star. This is what we are attempting to do, is to build a collection system harvesting these nodules from the seabed. And we believe we will be able to achieve all of this by 2030, including carbon neutrality. And I think that will make us unique in all mining companies. So I want to just wrap up with this concept of this common heritage of humankind. So this is the language that is in the 1994 law that governs deep sea mining in international waters. And this law has been ratified by the vast majority, I think 167 countries, 93% of the world's governments, so the vast majority. And it says that we will do deep sea mining. That was decided in the law. What is now being decided is, how do we do it? What are the regulations? And how do we do the equity sharing for financial benefits? And so this is complex, because this is the first time ever a non-government is actually going to tax and distribute money to people. And so the International Seabed Authority's Finance Committee has been working on these difficult questions, like how much is the tax, the royalty? Who gets the funds? And how will they be distributed? And that's difficult, but they're working on it. And I wanted to propose a solution. So what if we could pay children to go to school instead of mining? Wouldn't that be pretty powerful? If instead of getting paid $1 a day to work in a mine, what if you got paid that same amount, but if you went to the school? And this obviously is for Africa and maybe Indonesia. And so how to do that? Well, there's this interesting project created by Sam Altman from ChatGPT called WorldCoin, and it's a cryptocurrency, but it uses this iris scanner to create what they call a proof of personhood, a proof that this is a real person. And it creates a unique ID, and it's verified with biometrics. So you can see here this scanner, this camera. It has, I think, 6 cameras. It verifies this person is a real person. It verifies that it's unique. And it does it in an autonomous and private focused manner. And it's integrated with a mobile phone app. And they just open sourced all of their software that runs on this. And so the idea is that you could potentially use this infrastructure to pay people directly. If you collected the royalties from the ISA and then to distribute them, you could go directly to the people in Africa, and if they go to the classroom, scan their iris, instead of going into the mine, you could give them $1. I think it's an interesting concept that I would love to see others develop. So let me end the presentation. We are going to need vast amounts of metals for the energy transition. And in my view, there will not be a net zero without deep sea minerals. There probably is enough material on land, but it just takes too long, and there's too much environmental and social damage in the process. So we need seabed minerals. And new technology changes the argument. One of the advantages of our vehicle is that it does not land. It minimizes the sediment disturbance. We don't actually touch the seabed, we just touch the nodules. So we don't believe there will be a plume. There'll be a little bit of disturbance as we remove a rock, but orders of magnitude less than a big tracked vehicle. And because we can selectively pick up, we can preserve the biodiversity. If we detect the megafauna, if we detect life that we can see on the nodules, if it's say a millimeter or bigger, then we'll leave it behind. And so, you know, I want to kind of describe what we do as not deep sea mining. It's not land mining. It's what I'm calling non-mined battery metals. The technology that we're bringing of preserving the habitat, I think deserves to not be categorized as traditional mining. And then finally, I think WorldCoin is a very interesting and innovative solution that could allow the distribution of royalties directly to people to go to school, children to go to school, without the corruption risk and without the overhead of traditional approaches. And wouldn't it be great if we could end artisanal mining by children in the Congo and pay them to go to school instead? So that is my last slide. I just wanted to make people aware. We did just about a week ago publish our ESG and annual report for 2023. I think this is a great piece of work. It lists what we're doing to support 8 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and is available without even requiring an email address on our website. So thank you for that. I will now open up to questions. Over to you, Holly.
There we go. All right. Elva has a couple of questions in the chat, Oliver.
Okay.
Do you want me to read them, or do you want?
Yeah, why don't you read them so that way it's okay. for the recording.
Okay, I think you've answered a lot of this first one, but I'll go ahead and read it. So Elva says, Oliver, you were questioning why in the 21st century we could still mine and pollute the environment. I ask you why we should pollute the ocean with deep sea mining. The cost is equally high. There's life in the ocean, not human, but a large diversity that is important functions. Oops, sorry. Of which we all benefit. And then she followed up after you some of the slides. Dear Oliver, interesting slides. How will you manage the sediment plumes with compounds into the water column and the overlying interface sediment water to avoid polluting the biota and the clogging of the biota gills?
Yeah, so, you know, first thing to say is that until we can get to full circularity, we have to get these metals from somewhere. And so the question is, should we get them where we have the highest impact or the lowest impact? So we're not, I want to be clear, I'm not claiming we will have zero impact. Any extraction industry, whether it's coal, oil and gas, or mining for metals, has an impact. But we need these metals. And so our view is that we should get them where we can have the least impact, not the highest impact, which is what we do today with rainforests in Indonesia. Now, specifically on the sediment plume, we don't believe our sediment disturbance will be large enough to qualify as a plume. Again, our vehicle doesn't land, it's hovering, and it doesn't actually touch the seabed, it just touches the nodules. And yes, there will be a little bit of sediment disturbed as you pick up the nodule, but it will be significantly less than having a massive tracked vehicle. And we've actually published a blog post of a piece of lab equipment that we built to kind of optimize the movement and the design of the claw to minimize that sediment. So I'd encourage you to look at that blog post. You know, by moving the arm in a different mechanism and by the design of the claw, we can even reduce the amount of sediment, and that's something we're focused on.
Great. All right. JM, you had your hand up. You're on mute.
Yeah, I got you. Thank you, Oliver, for a very informative presentation there. And I wanted to commend you for, you know, emphasizing at least 3-4 locations, you know, engagement with the developing world, as well as with Africa, as well as this common heritage of the humankind and the WorldCoin construct. Now, I wanted to suggest 2 things. Number one is International Energy Organization in the month of May is organizing for the first time a big symposium on cooking. And one of the ultimate solution, and that will be the solar power induction cooking, which will be requiring to the tune of almost 1 billion or so 5 kilowatt hour class batteries. And he is but currently going to be emphasizing the needs of better cooking in Africa. And it might be worth including in your market segment analysis that large amount of battery needs, and nickel NMC could be one of the input there beyond the cars which we talk all the time. And it may resonate with some of the policymakers in a little different way. And the second thing I wanted to suggest was this world coin concept and biometrics. There are lots of questions in the mind of many, but in government of India has integrated in a big way world largest biometric database and the security associated with it, and making sure that if there are any lessons to be learned from that, integrating the data of 900 million people, biometric data, and applying them to this world coin in any way, lessons to be learned. Those were the two suggestions I had. One was including in the market segment the need for NMC batteries to the tune of, say, 1 billion pieces or so for solar induction cooking. And a second is learning lessons from large-scale application of this world coin. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. That's interesting. Maybe we should move to if there are other questions.
Yeah. Okay. JM? There. Let's see. I'm not hearing
Can't hear
you.
you. I think you're on.
Nope. Sorry, JM. Still not hearing you yet.
Now?
There you
Yes.
Hi, my name is Jiaming. So this question is about countries like the DRC and Indonesia. Have there been studies or other expectations on how the communities and the economies that largely depend on cobalt and nickel will be affected by the deep sea mining industry as it expands? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. So unfortunately, most of the value of the minerals doesn't go to the communities. It goes to the people that build the mines, primarily Chinese companies to date. So the ISA has published some data on the impact of deep sea minerals to terrestrial mining. And I think their conclusions are that given the sheer demand, it's not going to be very material.
All right. Rahul? Go ahead and ask your question. You'll need to take yourself off mute. Oh. Do you see the mute button? Hmm.
Yeah, Rahul, you're still on mute. You should see the microphone button in the bottom of the screen.
Oh, shoot. Do you want to type your question in the chat? I unfortunately can't unmute you from here. If you want to type, Rahul, Tom, why don't you go ahead and ask your question, and then hopefully we can circle back to Rahul.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, thanks. Mr. Gunasekara, your presentation was one of the best and most optimistic I've heard in a long time. So I just wanted to say that up front. It's very encouraging on many fronts. You say you have a project underway off the coast, I believe, of Florida. And one of the questions that came to my mind is the issue of scale. And if you're picking up, I'm not being sarcastic or anything, but if you're picking up one nodule at a time, how many nodules do you have to pick up to really make a difference in world markets and world energy demands? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for the question and for the feedback. Much appreciated. We do pick up the nodules one by one, but we've designed the robotic arms to move really, really quickly. It's one of the unique pieces of IP that we have in the system. So they are designed to be under 1.5 seconds from seeing the nodule to placing it in the internal conveyor system. Now, on the production size system, we call it Eureka 3, we will have 16 arms, and we will have a 6-ton payload. And each vehicle can operate with a 4-hour mission time. So every 4 hours, we can fill 6,000 kilograms. And with a scalable fleet of, say, 100 robots, you can start to see how we can achieve millions of tons. We also have a Eureka 4 design in paper, which is an even larger robot of 25 metric tons. So, by 2030, we think we can be doing of the order of, 6 million tons a year. That would be a few percent of the worldwide production of nickel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, Rahul, you're ready for your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah, hi. Nice presentation. I have one comment and one question. The comment is that very rightly you have mentioned that the composition or percentage of metals available on land is reducing, going down, and it has come to about 1% or less. But then if you look at the composition or percentage of nickel, copper, and cobalt in nodules, it is also about 1% or less. So we may not be having in terms of percentage of metals, we may not have a totally different kind of deposit. But the flip side is that you have these nodules in trillions of tons over millions of square kilometers on the sea floor, and with the other positives that you have mentioned, deep sea mining could definitely be a better option, and especially with the diminishing land resources. So that's my comment. I don't disagree with you, but then the percentages could be similar, but still the resource is different, and the advantages are different or better. The question is your 5th slide, substitution.
Yep.
Can we see that? Substitution. Yeah, okay. So here you have mentioned a couple of different options like LFP and NMC and others. So I have been hearing about these alternatives for battery chemistry of batteries. Now, is the industry convinced as to which may be the best option in future, or still there is R&D going on in this? My worry is that we look for nickel, copper, and cobalt, and by the time we actually start mining, I hope there is no better chemistry of battery that is available, and then we have to start looking for a new metal. So is there anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, batteries are constantly being researched, and there's new technology both on the cathode and the anode in development. But it typically takes maybe 20 years from a discovery in the lab to commercialize. So I don't worry too much about radically new technologies. being very meaningful in the next 20 years. I would say there is sodium ion, which is a chemistry that doesn't even use lithium, that some are beginning to commercialize. I don't think that's a very good fit for transportation because it's significantly heavier, has much less energy, gravimetric energy density, but is potentially a good fit for energy storage applications. So, you know, I think LFP is gaining share in China. It is a chemistry that others are considering, but you know, in the future, I think we're going to see more solid state type chemistries where the electrolyzer that's between the anode and the cathode becomes solid state that can allow energy density to go up rapidly. But I think for the foreseeable future, NMC and LFP are going to be the dominant chemistries in the medium term. Also, just wanted to comment, you know, it's very rare to find a 1% grade of nickel on land, almost impossible. Now, there are existing mines that are producing, but if you look at new deposits, nearly all of the new deposits for nickel are significantly below 1%. As I said, I think Gigametals in Canada is about 0.2%, and that is kind of the norm. And that is an order of magnitude less than you know, the combined grade that we can get, given that nodules have not just one metal but four. So that's a comment there. Okay.
Thanks. JM, back to you again for another question.
Hi.
There you go.
So this one is if the marine scientists say, like, if you have to leave 50% of the nodules behind, would you then design your Eureka to move twice as fast and the arms can move like half as fast or something?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the reality is that the collection time is not the largest. We spend the majority of the time moving up and down the water column. So if the marine scientists say we need to leave 50% of the material behind, it wouldn't be a problem. Even if we didn't redesign the vehicle, we would just, maybe the 4-hour mission would go to 4.5 hours, you know, approximately. Of course, we could redesign the vehicle, as you said, to move at twice the speed. That would allow us to compensate for that. So I don't think that's a big problem for us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Okay. Any other questions for Oliver? Tom?
Yes, thanks for allowing a second question. How autonomous or automated is your marine system, your ships that bring the nodules up and down? Is that all an autonomous vessel, or is there a human crew on those vessels? Thank you.
So in the first years of deployment, we will have a crew, and it will be a regular transport ship. You know, we have a lot to design ourselves, which is really the AUV, the autonomous underwater vehicle, and the crane. That is fully automated. But the ships, we are just leveraging off-the-shelf bulk transport ships that we retrofit. If and when fully autonomous versions of these become available, we would happily use them. But in the short to medium term, I think I'm not aware of that technology yet being mature, and so we'll just reuse off-the-shelf bulk transport ships with a crew.